God bless everyone. Today, I want to share the testimony of our brother, Jack Martin, who experienced a near-death encounter that forever changed his life. He claims that he met Queen Elizabeth II and spoke with her for hours, during which she revealed to him her secrets about life, history, and the world. If I had to begin anywhere, it would be the night I nearly died in a hospital bed. But to do that would mean skipping over the whole reason I was there in the first place. My name is Jack Martin. I'm 56 years old. Born and raised in Ohio. For as long as I can remember, I've had an obsession with British history, particularly the monarchy. It all started as a quirky hobby during my college years, something to distract me from the chaos of a miserable family life. But over the years, this fascination grew into something far more important. I eventually made a name for myself as a historian specializing in the life and reign of Queen Elizabeth II. I wrote books, taught courses, and gave lectures across the country. Her life became my life. Her reign my obsession. I even joked that she was like a distant grandmother. Such was the familiarity I felt with her. Her steady, composed existence seemed to bring order to my own chaotic life. Yet, amid all of this, my connection to faith slowly slipped away. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith. I grew up going to church every Sunday. But by the time I found myself deep in my career, God and I were no longer in communication. Religion turned into an abstract idea, something from a distant world that no longer felt personal to me. I respected it historically, but I didn't feel it. If you had asked me then, I would have told you that my career was my purpose. I believed history held all the answers. The study of the lives of those who ruled, how they made decisions that shaped entire nations, was like looking at the pulse of civilization itself. It was my way of explaining life, without the need for divine intervention or salvation. But then, 2 weeks ago, everything changed. I was in a brutal car accident. I don't remember the actual crash itself. I was on my way home from giving yet another lecture on Queen Elizabeth. Just another ordinary night driving down a rain-slicked exit ramp. I don't even remember the red light that blurred too quickly in front of me. The medics later told me that my heart stopped twice on the way to the hospital. They didn't expect me to survive. Lying there in that sterile hospital room, I felt something slipping away, something heavier than just consciousness. It was as if I was hovering on the edge of a vast abyss, caught between two worlds. In that moment, I understood with crystal clarity every so-called achievement of mine. Every lecture, every book, all the work I had done, suddenly meant nothing. I was struck by the weight of it all. The emptiness I had missed over the years as I chased the stories of kings and queens, thinking that their lives held some secret truth or higher purpose that I could apply to my own. But now, lying there, I realized the cold reality. I had never truly looked beyond the pages of history. I had never truly sought something greater than what I could measure with facts and dates. I had built my life around a history that was rich in detail but devoid of meaning. The doctors later told me that my heart had stopped not once, but twice on the way to the hospital. Each time, I felt like I was teetering on the edge, slipping over into a vast, consuming darkness. In those moments, seconds, or perhaps hours, time didn't seem to matter anymore. I could feel myself pulling away from everything I knew. The accident itself was just a blur, headlights flashing against the rain-soaked pavement. followed by a sudden, gut-wrenching slam. I had been on my way home from yet another lecture on Queen Elizabeth. Just another one of 100 I'd given over the years. It was an ordinary night. The kind that most people would hardly even think twice about. But as I lay there, blood pooling beneath me and my consciousness flickering like a dying light bulb, I realized that the world I had built, my achievements, my legacy, was fragile and fleeting. The crash had robbed me of my sense of purpose, of everything I had once relied on to make sense of the world. In those moments between life and death, it became clear to me, I had been so consumed by history that I had never fully lived for something greater than myself. I was on the verge of slipping into a darkness that would be impossible to return from. And in that vast space, I realized that only one thing truly mattered, what I had been missing all along. It wasn't about history, or the reign of monarchs. It was about something much bigger. Something beyond time. Beyond the tangible world that I had spent so many years studying. It was about seeking a connection with the divine. With something far beyond the history I had come to idolize. In that moment, I realized that my pursuit of history had distracted me from what really mattered: faith, love, and the search for a greater meaning in life. And as I hovered there, close to death, I began to feel a sense of peace I had never experienced before, a peace that came from the realization that there was a purpose to everything. Even in the moments where I had once thought life was just a series of events without any higher meaning, I could feel an overwhelming sense of futility settling in. Heavier than any of the injuries I'd sustained. All my years of research. All the time I'd devoted to unraveling the history of British royals, those late nights hunched over books and documents, suddenly seemed to fade before my eyes. Turning to dust. My work. My career. My so-called legacy, everything that had once felt so significant, now looked so small. So incredibly insignificant. And worse yet, that hollow feeling at the center of it all, the one I had always managed to ignore, grew louder and louder until it became deafening. For years, I had dismissed the idea of divine purpose, relying on history to make sense of life instead of anything higher. I had convinced myself that it was enough to follow facts, to depend on dates and figures to explain the world. I had told myself I didn't need God. That faith was something for others, not for someone like me, who found solace in logic and history. But now, lying there on the edge of eternity, those convictions crumbled in my hands. The very questions I had dismissed, the faith I had brushed aside, all came rushing back in a wave. It was as if a dam had burst. I felt stripped bare, exposed to a void bigger than anything I had ever encountered in the pages of my books. And in that void, there was nothing left of myself to hold on to. No achievements. No titles. No recognition, only the question I had spent my lifetime running from. I remembered verses, half-forgotten lines from childhood Sundays spent squirming in a wooden pew. Words I hadn't thought about in years. One verse from Matthew hit especially hard: "For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world, and lose his own soul?" Those words weren't just scripture now, they were a direct question, piercing through my pride. I could almost hear the voice of the preacher from decades ago, talking about sin, salvation, and a life without Christ being a life without true meaning. Back then, I had shrugged it off as religious talk, something for other people, perhaps even comforting for those who believed. But now, in those moments, I felt the weight of it all, like a stone pressing on my chest. The grandeur of everything I had cherished, the royal ceremonies, the history, the rise and fall of empires, suddenly felt hollow. Like a grand performance that held no true substance. It was as though everything I had once revered was but a fleeting shadow. Part of a much larger, more profound truth that I had never truly faced. Here I was. No longer a scholar or an expert. But just a man on the edge of something far greater. Standing before a God I had long neglected and a soul I had barely acknowledged. It was terrifying. Humbling. And yet, in this moment, I felt a strange sense of relief. As if I was finally confronting the truth I had evaded for so long. As I drifted further into the darkness, there came the faintest glimmer of something, whether hope, grace, or perhaps a fleeting moment of divine mercy. It was like a whisper that echoed in the quiet depths of my being, telling me, "You don't have to be lost." It was so subtle, so delicate, but it was enough to hold on to. Enough to remind me that I was not beyond saving. The road that had brought me to this moment seemed to be coming to a close. But before me, another path opened up, unfamiliar, mysterious, and yet filled with the possibility of redemption. It was a journey into the unknown. But for the first time, I felt ready to step forward. In the darkness, I felt a presence approach. And there he was, Dr. Andrews. My physician. He appeared just as I remembered him. Glasses perched on his nose. His expression earnest yet infused with an ethereal quality. "Jack," he said softly. "You've been through a lot. Haven't you?" I nodded, still grappling with the weight of the experience. My heart stopped twice. I murmured, recalling the fear and emptiness that had settled over me. I felt like everything I had accomplished was meaningless. Dr. Andrews nodded knowingly, his words cutting through the fog of despair. It's easy to get lost in the pursuit of knowledge, especially when you've dedicated your life to studying history. But in that pursuit, you may have overlooked something fundamental, the need for faith and a connection to something greater. His words struck me deeply, echoing the void I had felt in those harrowing moments. I thought I could find meaning through facts and figures, through the stories of kings and queens. I admitted. But now it feels so hollow. "Faith isn't about having all the answers," he replied, his voice steady. "It's about trust, trusting in God's plan. Remember what Jesus said, 'For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world, and lose his own soul?' Your achievements are valuable, Jack, but they pale in comparison to your soul's eternal significance." In that moment, a spark of hope ignited within me, as if the very core of my being had been awakened. "Dr. Andrews, I want to believe again," I said, my voice trembling, yet filled with a deep yearning. "I want to find that connection." His smile was soft, yet brimming with reassurance. "It's never too late to return to God," he said gently. "Open your heart to Him, and He will guide you back home." As he began to fade into the light, I felt the heavy darkness lifting, replaced by a profound warmth and clarity that filled every corner of my being. It was as though something deep inside me had stirred, a renewed sense of direction, a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in what felt like forever, I no longer felt adrift. I understood that I was no longer alone, and that the path ahead, though unknown, was now illuminated with the possibility of something greater. I could feel an overwhelming sense of futility settling in, heavier than any of the injuries I had sustained. All the years of research, all the time I had devoted to unraveling the history of British royals, the countless nights spent hunched over books and documents, suddenly it all seemed to fade before my eyes, turning to dust. My work, My career. My so-called legacy, everything that had once seemed so significant now appeared incredibly small and insignificant. And worse yet, the hollow feeling that had been at the core of my existence, the one I had always managed to ignore, grew louder and louder until it became deafening. For years, I had dismissed the idea of divine purpose. I leaned on history to make sense of life, relying on facts and dates to explain the world. I told myself that it was enough, that I didn't need God, faith, or anything that couldn't be proven through study and reason. But now, as I lay there at the edge of eternity, those convictions crumbled in my hands. The very questions I had dismissed, the faith I had brushed aside, all rushed back to me, overwhelming my thoughts. It was as though a dam had burst inside me. I felt stripped bare, exposed to a vast, consuming void far bigger than anything I had ever encountered in the pages of my books. And in that void, there was nothing left of myself to hold on to, no achievements, no titles, no recognition, only the question I had spent my lifetime running from. I remembered verses, half-forgotten lines from childhood Sundays spent squirming in a wooden pew. Words I hadn't thought about in years. One verse from Matthew hit me especially hard, "For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world, and lose his own soul?" Those words weren't just scripture now, they were a direct question that pierced through my pride, cutting through the walls I had built around myself. I could almost hear the voice of the preacher from decades ago, talking about sin, salvation, and the consequences of living a life without Christ. Back then, I had shrugged it off as religious talk, something for other people, perhaps even comforting for those who believed. But now, in those moments of crisis, I felt the weight of it all like a stone pressing on my chest. The grandeur of everything I had loved, the royal ceremonies, the history, the rise and fall of kingdoms, suddenly felt like empty theater. It was as if they were shadows on the wall of a much greater truth I had never truly looked at head-on. Here I was, not a scholar or an expert, but a man on the brink, facing a God I had neglected and a soul I had barely acknowledged. It was terrifying and humbling in equal measure. And yet, somehow, I felt as if I was finally being honest with myself for the first time. As I drifted further into the darkness, I felt the faintest flicker of something, hope, maybe, or just the smallest sliver of grace. It was like a whisper, saying you don't have to be lost. The whisper was almost imperceptible, but it was enough to cling to. And as I felt myself slipping further into the unknown, I knew that the road that had led me here was ending. But another one, strange and unknowable, was opening ahead of me. From the murky shadows, a figure began to emerge. She was luminous, glowing softly against the drab backdrop of despair. I squinted into the gloom, my heart racing. And as the outline sharpened, I realized who it was. Queen Elizabeth II. She stood before me as regal and commanding as I had seen her in countless photographs. But there was something profoundly unsettling about her presence in this place of torment. She appeared both majestic and weighed down by the gravity of her own choices. "Jack Martin," she said, her voice resonating like a distant echo, but filled with an intimate familiarity. "You stand at a crossroads. Do you not?" Her gaze pierced through me, seeing beyond my flesh and bones, deep into the very fabric of my soul. "You've studied my life, dissected my reign. But do you understand the price of power and prestige?" I could hardly form a response, my thoughts racing as I stood before a figure I had revered for so long. "Your Majesty." I don't know what to say. I stammered, my words tumbling out awkwardly. I never thought I'd see you here. She smiled faintly. A ghost of the warmth I had admired from afar. Yet it didn't reach her eyes. Many looked to me for answers, for inspiration. But few understand the burdens I bore. The crown, the responsibilities, they consumed my life, distracting me from the very essence of existence. She paused, her voice heavy with regret. I lost sight of what truly mattered. Her admission struck me like a bolt of lightning, illuminating the shadows that had clung to my heart. But you were a symbol of strength and stability, I said, almost pleading. How could you lose faith? I was swept away by the currents of my role, she confessed, her voice now tinged with sorrow. The rituals, the duties, they felt essential. But in truth, they pulled me away from the simple act of believing. In my quest to uphold the monarchy, I neglected my own relationship with God. Her words resonated deeply within me, echoing my own journey. I've been running from my faith too, I admitted, feeling the weight of my own revelations pressing against my chest. I thought history held all the answers, that knowledge could replace belief. But now, standing here, I didn't finish the sentence. There was nothing left to say. In that moment, I saw the truth in her eyes. Both of us had been so consumed by the pursuit of legacy, status, and worldly pursuits that we had neglected what truly mattered. The emptiness I had felt was mirrored in her own regret. She gazed at me with understanding. You are not alone in this, Jack. All those who search for truth will find it, if they seek it in the right place. A sense of peace began to wash over me. The vastness of history, the kings and queens I had studied, now felt like mere chapters in a larger, divine story. For the first time, I realized that true power came not from knowledge alone, but from a deeper connection to the divine, to God's plan for each of us. Queen Elizabeth II's presence began to fade, but her words lingered in the air, and I felt the darkness receding. In its place, warmth and clarity flooded my heart. I knew the path ahead was no longer about the pursuit of earthly recognition or accolades. It was about seeking redemption, reclaiming faith, and understanding that the true meaning of life lies not in power, but in love, in grace, and in the eternal connection to God. I feel so lost, I whispered, the weight of the years bearing down on me. Knowledge without faith is a barren landscape, Queen Elizabeth replied, her voice imbued with wisdom. I reached the heights of power, but the emptiness at the top is unlike anything I could have imagined. She paused, her gaze distant as if recalling her struggles with the responsibilities that had consumed her life. I thought my achievements defined my worth, she continued. But they only veiled my soul's deepest needs. In this darkness, I see now that it was always about faith, about believing in something beyond myself. As she spoke, the shadows around us flickered. They revealed the tortured expressions of souls trapped in an eternal limbo, their faces twisted in silent agony. The darkness felt colder, more oppressive. Yet her words shone like a beacon of light. Queen Elizabeth's gaze deepened, and I could feel the weight of her words hang in the air, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Jack, she began, her voice steady, yet tinged with a sadness that came from years of reflection. You stand at a crossroads, a moment where the past meets the eternal. You see, the duties I bore as a monarch were not merely responsibilities, they were burdens that often led me astray from the path I was meant to walk. She took a deep breath. as if steeling herself to continue. Each day, I was adorned in the jewels of my office. But beneath the crown lay a heart that wrestled with the very essence of faith. I listened, captivated by the honesty of her confession. It was rare to hear such vulnerability from a figure who had always appeared so composed, so unwavering. In her final days, she continued. The wisdom of King Solomon haunted her thoughts. He was the wisest of kings, she reflected, her voice softening as though recalling a painful memory. Blessed with riches and knowledge beyond compare. Yet even he strayed, placing his trust in earthly power and wealth instead of God. The air around us felt thick as her words echoed in my mind. The story of Solomon had always been a part of my studies, something I had recited countless times. But now, standing there in the presence of this great and humble figure, it struck me profoundly. He built great temples and amassed great treasures, she said, her gaze distant as she spoke of Solomon's downfall. But in doing so, he lost sight of the one true source of wisdom. The very things that were meant to honor God became distractions. And in the end, they led him away from his grace. The image of Solomon, once a towering figure in my studies, transformed before my eyes into a cautionary tale, a warning about the dangers of placing trust in fleeting earthly things. Jack, she pressed on, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my heart race. I became so ensnared in the duties of the crown, in maintaining the image of strength and stability, that I too neglected my relationship with the Almighty. I thought my position could grant me purpose, but it only veiled the longing in my soul. Her voice was filled with regret, but also with the clarity of understanding. Her admission struck a deep chord within me, resonating with the very struggles I had been facing in my own life. I, too, had neglected my faith. And now, here in this moment, I was beginning to understand the depth of my own lost connection. There are verses in Proverbs, she continued, her voice soft yet resolute, that now resonate within me. Verses I had overlooked in my pursuit of worldly acclaim. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding, in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. The truth of those words pierced through the fabric of my skepticism, cutting through the layers of doubt I had built around myself. Here was a queen, humbled and reflective, inviting me to rediscover the faith I had cast aside so many years ago. It was a moment of profound revelation. There is something fleeting about earthly accomplishments, she pressed on, her gaze unwavering. They shine like the sun, but just as quickly, they fade into darkness. In Ecclesiastes, we learn that all is vanity and vexation of spirit. I lived in the halls of power, yet it was in the stillness of my heart that I found the greatest emptiness. My achievements paled against the eternal truth of God's love. A wave of understanding washed over me as her words resonated deep within my spirit. I had spent my life chasing knowledge, accolades, and recognition. But in doing so, I had lost sight of the very foundation of my being. Your achievements are not meaningless, Jack, she reassured me, her voice growing stronger with each word. But they must guide you back to God, not lead you away. The road to eternal life is paved with faith, not with mere knowledge. As the shadows shifted and flickered around us, her words were filled with wisdom. The struggles she shared with me resonated deeply within my own soul, merging with the revelations I had been confronting in those moments. It was as though a spark of hope had reignited within me, hope that was now intertwined with a renewed sense of faith. I was reminded that, even in the darkest moments, even when it feels like everything is slipping away, There is always the possibility of redemption. Her presence began to fade, like a gentle breeze drifting away. But the weight of her message remained, indelibly etched in my heart. As she dissolved into the light, I was left standing at the crossroads she had so wisely described. I realized that I was on the precipice of a life-altering decision, not just a pursuit of intellectual achievement, but the chance to embrace true spiritual peace. The opportunity to reconnect with God, to step into the love and grace I had long neglected, was now before me. This was no longer just a journey of the mind, but a profound transformation of the soul. God is ever present, she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of centuries of wisdom. He will never forsake you. He will guide you home. In that moment, the darkness surrounding us began to fade slightly, as if her words shone a light into the very depths of my soul. The weight of her words settled deep inside me, and I realized that my near-death experience had been more than just a brush with oblivion. It had been a divine invitation, a call to return to the faith I had lost, to rediscover the truth that I had turned away from. Trust in Him, Jack, she urged, her voice a gentle yet firm reminder of the love that awaited me. Let the wisdom of the ages guide your steps. And remember, it is not too late to embrace the truth that God has set before you. As she concluded her confession, I felt an unshakable conviction wash over me. The Queen, a symbol of history and power, had laid bare her soul before me, reminding me that our true legacy lies not in the accolades we accumulate but in the faith we hold dear. With that realization, I felt ready to embrace a new chapter in my life, one filled with purpose, grounded in the eternal love of God. I awoke in the sterile embrace of the hospital room. The antiseptic smell was sharp in my nostrils, and the rhythmic beeping of machines surrounded me like a distant heartbeat. The realization of my near-death experience washed over me, mingling with the haunting echoes of Queen Elizabeth II's voice. Her words resonated deep within me, a reminder of the truths I had ignored for far too long. I could feel a weight lifting off my chest, as if I had been given a second chance, a chance to truly live. In those quiet moments, the memory of her somber reflections hung heavily in the air. She spoke of how her royal duties had led her away from God, and how the wisdom of King Solomon haunted her, even in the highest echelons of power. Her confession stirred something within me, igniting a longing for something deeper, something real. The juxtaposition of her grandeur and her humility resonated with me. And in that moment, a spark of realization flickered within my soul. As I lay in bed, I reached for the Bible resting on the bedside table. The worn pages felt familiar under my fingertips, as if they had been waiting for me. I started to read, allowing the words to wash over me like balm for my soul. Proverbs and Ecclesiastes jumped out at me, their wisdom echoing in the stillness of my heart. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity, I whispered to myself, feeling the truth of it sink deep into my bones. All the pursuits I had chased, wealth, recognition, success, seemed hollow compared to the peace that came from embracing faith. As days gradually turned into weeks, I began to notice a transformation that went far beyond my physical healing. While my body regained strength, my spirit was undergoing something far more profound. It was as though I was being reborn. Like a new version of myself was emerging from the shadows of illness and doubt. Each passing day, I found myself increasingly drawn to the teachings of Jesus. His love, His grace, His understanding filled the empty spaces in my heart that I had once thought were unfillable. For so long, I had tried to find meaning through intellectual pursuits, Yet I realized now that my true purpose was far simpler, yet more profound. This awakening, this moment of clarity, was not just about recovery, it was about rediscovering my life's purpose and realigning my actions with the faith I had neglected. The urgency to share this transformation became undeniable. I could no longer keep this newfound sense of purpose to myself. I had experienced the deepest depths of despair and now stood at the threshold of a rebirth. And I felt compelled to help others find the same redemption. I began to speak openly about my encounter with Queen Elizabeth, recounting how her candid reflections on her own spiritual journey had been a catalyst for mine. Her words had forced me to confront the choices I had made in my own life. And I knew I had to pass that wisdom on to others. I joined local community gatherings, where I shared my testimony in church services, urging those who heard me to seek a closer, personal relationship with God. I felt a deep calling to help people understand that their faith wasn't something abstract or unreachable but was a living, breathing connection to something greater than themselves. In the quiet space of Bible study groups, I guided others through the scriptures, sharing my experiences and helping them navigate the stories of faith and redemption that had brought me so much comfort and clarity. In every conversation, I emphasized that true salvation wasn't found in the accumulation of knowledge or worldly accolades. Rather, it was in the quiet, humble acceptance of God's grace, an open heart that allows divine love to enter and transform. As I shared my story, I could see the curiosity sparking in others' eyes. I saw the light of hope beginning to grow in their hearts. And I felt a deep connection with them. With each passing moment, I could sense myself transforming, becoming a living testament to the power of redemption. I no longer sought validation in titles or achievements, but in the simple act of living out the love and compassion that I had found. This transformation brought me more joy than any worldly success had ever offered. It was a deep, fulfilling sense of peace in knowing that I was part of something far greater than myself. I found my place in the world by serving others, by giving back to the community in any way I could, knowing that each act of kindness brought me closer to the heart of God. This was the new path I had chosen, a life illuminated not just by the insights I had gained from Queen Elizabeth's wisdom but also by the light of faith that now guided every step I took. It was a journey toward a life anchored in humility, love, and purpose. I was no longer focused on the fleeting pursuits of fame, wealth, or recognition. Instead, my focus was on building a deeper, more enduring connection with God, a relationship founded not on what I had accomplished but on what I could give. In this new journey, I learned that true fulfillment came not from the approval of others but from the quiet, unshakable joy of knowing I was walking the path God had set for me. If you believe in God and near-death experiences, subscribe to Life at NDE today. Discover inspiring messages from God through powerful near-death stories that bring hope and understanding. Hit subscribe now and join us in spreading the light of faith.